Welcome back to Rig Recon Live. I'm Bruce Quick alongside Jason Witmier. And before we get to today's topic and guest, going to go over a couple quick housekeeping items. Make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Rig Recon. You can find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and you can even watch it on YouTube at Rig Recon. And then lastly, head over to rigrecon.com for all the latest apparatus content, podcast content, and more. And let's jump into it today, Jason. So the focus on today's podcast is aerial apparatus spec, and we're lucky to host an industry expert on the topic, Larry Camillo. And Larry is a well-seasoned firefighter, including time with the Houston Fire Department, and he even spent time at Station 68, which is historically one of the busiest stations in Houston. He was recognized as the 2014 Firefighter of the Year. It is involved with the Hunter Club of Houston. Currently, Larry's the fire chief for the City of Stafford in Texas and the president of Seaside Consultants. Among his extensive fireground expertise, Larry's personal focus has been in aerial apparatus specs, operational use, and truck company operations. So quite the resume there, Larry. We appreciate your time today, and thanks for joining us on Rig Recon Live.
Oh, thanks for the invite. I mean, it's a great opportunity. I'll talk to anybody about fire trucks, in particular ladder trucks and apparatus stuff. So absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess we'll just dive right into it. Writing specifications for new fire apparatus can be challenging, especially today, right? With all the changing technology, a lot of departments use the last spec as a good starting point, but it's critical to stay up to date with the times, and it becomes even more difficult when you throw in the aspect of an aerial apparatus. So maybe talk to us about some key challenges for end users in developing aerial apparatus specs.
I think you're 100% right. Technology seems to be infiltrating or taking over the fire industry more every year. I mean, it's like when we used to have hardwired fire trucks, now everything is electronic modules. Same thing with halogen floodlighting. Now we have LED floodlighting. Before, where you had to have a lease-the-ville alternator of so many amps as opposed to what you can get away with now. So technology is very much at play. Specific to your comment, a lot of people start with what they last bought and build from that. And unfortunately, that doesn't always seem to work. I've seen some places where it's just a reinvention of something that was less than optimal. It just has the latest and greatest technology, but it's still the same baseline concept with the same limitations it had in its original configuration. And that's not to be critical, but I think that every time you're going to invest the type of money that an aerial apparatus costs now, that you really need to do a ground up assessment to determine, has your community changed? Has your organizational needs changed? Has your staffing changed? Has your tactics, your culture changed? And that may completely flip-flop you from a straight stick rear mount to a mid-mount ladder tower to a tiller. And
Sure.
I think that once you go down the left fork in the road, you're always going to stay on the left fork.
Sure. And I think as we introduced you, you got extensive experience doing this. So maybe to pawn off of that, what's maybe the biggest difference you've seen for when you started to where you're at now, and where can people take advantage of that difference?
In terms of apparatus?
In terms of aerial apparatus spec, yeah.
I think that a lot of the manufacturers now are really starting to look into what 20 years ago would have been called an exotic alloy or exotic metals. You look at some of the manufacturers are using 100,000 PSI tensile strength steel now for their aerial devices, which in the big picture, it's a win for the fire service. Not only does it offer the same strength and performance characteristics, still meets NFPA 2-to-1 safety factors, but it allows a smaller dimensional device, which lowers the overall weight, which makes a smaller form factor for departments that want 100 apparatus, but they can only afford a pumper size space in their firehouse, for example, or in their community, low bridges, whatnot. So I think there's a lot of good things that have come about this just with the advent of materials. Engine regulations are always going to be engine regulations. That's another topic. So where I think the biggest advantage has just been in the overall aerial engineering in terms of what they've been able to do to really still meet the objectives of the departments and the needs of their communities, but do it in something that is a little bit more space and weight conscious.
So Larry, you talked about knowing your neighborhood and knowing what type of incidents you're responding on, and how someone looks at a truck they built 20 years ago and they say, well, this always worked for us, but this new development went up and there's cul-de-sacs in it and turning radius comes into play, wheelbase comes into play. Talk a little bit about what you experience with things like setbacks and just making that decision between, do I go rear mount or do I go mid mount?
Yeah. And those are very good points. I'll use where I'm the fire chief now as an example. We're a bedroom community, wheat border, Southwest Houston. And so we're a landlocked city. But what we found is that we run 207-foot rear mount quints and a rescue engine out of 3 stations. And what we found is that no longer works for us. And it doesn't work for us because we have a 192-acre development that was a former manufacturing facility, a large international company that sold it. And now it's turned into nothing but 4 and 5 story center hallway apartments, hotels, motels, restaurants. It's turned into all of that. So where we found that the 107 worked previously, it didn't with our reassessment. And so we've gone to a tandem axle 107. We needed the extra compartment space because the ancillary responsibilities of the department, whether it be technical rescue, whether it be expanding our vehicle extrication tool inventory, necessitated more compartment space. So it's very much multi-dimensional when you're doing that. Just because a rear mount always worked for you doesn't mean that you haven't added a couple of 300,000 square foot manufacturing facilities, or what is very common down here now, and has always been in the North, is building your residential over your storefronts. It's the cool thing right now. And that could really necessitate a lot of times a ladder tower, especially if it's going to be a high retail type development, to where you want that ladder tower in the front to where you can go curb level, which really leans you towards a mid mount. A rear mount will do it. But a lot of times a rear mount is going to be a 4-section aerial where a mid mount is a 5, which causes you to have to push back further from the building. And a lot of these places have that brownstone type feel. So you're not working with really super wide streets. Plus they've got on-street parking. So a lot of times it comes down to how many sections your aerial is to necessitate what your set down distance is going to be to get that bucket at grade level to ladder towers. And so there's just a lot of things that go into it. So you can't always say a rear mount's workforce. One of the biggest hiccups that I've seen is that a lot of departments, they buy what their neighbors have because their neighbors have it. And you have to do an honest assessment of what you need. If my neighbor is running a 95-foot aerial scope, it doesn't mean that a 95-foot aerial scope is what I need. And quite honestly, we're really good in the fire service of building redundancy, but we don't understand complementary. And so you will move far more people over a straight stick aerial if you have to than you ever will with the ladder tower bucket. But a ladder tower / tower ladder bucket is going to be a much more desirable device to deliver an elevated master straight or even a street level master straight, just because it's designed for that. It can be done safely from point of use, and it's just a lot more flexible. So you really have to look at your box alarm assignments. What are you getting on your run cards? Who's running what around you? You don't have to have any input of what they buy. You just need to know what they buy. And so that way, when they're running on your box, you know how best to utilize them in your city. And conversely, they need to know what you run. So I think a lot of that comes into play, but just because you've always run a certain type of device doesn't mean that's still relevant today.
We like to talk a lot on Rig Recon about keeping up with the Joneses, and we talked about it in our pump sizing. So when you said if the neighbor has a 95-foot, then I need a 100-foot because I have to be bigger than the neighbor.
Right. And that would get the single biggest breakover there that I've seen is that a lot of people, I say a lot, I'm sorry, but with my vernacular, people will buy exactly what their neighbors bought just to say they have one. So they're in the cool kids club.
Yeah.
When in reality, they need a greater ground ladder storage capability, or they need to be able to do X, Y, and Z differently. They need more compartment space, less hose bed consideration. I don't need it as a quit. I can take it as a dry truck. A lot of it, I can't spec in the city of Stafford aerial apparatus the city of Houston uses, because in Houston, we run dry trucks. And that worked for us because it's an engine truck concept. In the suburbs, it's almost exclusively quits. And so realistically, we can't take an HFD spec rig and say, just make it a quit and have it work for us, where your compartment space goes to nothing. Personally, I don't like the jack spread of what Houston's buying right now in terms of just the setup space of the real estate it takes. So just always doing what everybody does around you. And that's the problem with the fire service. And y'all know as well as I do, once a brand gets ingrained in a certain regional area, you start to have those mutations where everybody around them buys the same brand, which is great. I don't have a problem with brand, because then you can leverage units and service for maybe an increased service capacity, which is great. But it doesn't mean the spec from that manufacturer has to be identical.
Right. 100%. And one of the items we specialize in safe fleet is scene lighting through FRC, right? And talking about knowing your needs and This space comes at a premium, and there's power limitations and lighting, and space is limited at the tip of an aerial device. Do you have any best practices that you recommend to a committee when specifying lighting on the tip?
Yeah, and I'll differentiate between a straight stick and a ladder tower bucket. And I'm sorry, I use ladder tower and tower ladder interchangeably, but they're two different devices. Obviously, as y'all know, my pet peeve is ladder tower buckets. There's a lot of them coming out on the market now. I've seen as many as 5 to 7 LED mini bars on a ladder tower bucket. You'll have 3 to 5 on the underside, and then you'll have one directly in front of where your scanning position is and your controls, and then you'll have one angled to the corners. And that's fine when you're in the bucket. The problem I have is that we have a tendency to forget that when a crew is working on top of a burning building in a smoky environment, and you have that floodlighting at that height, that is a blinding light with already diminished visibility. And if things are going badly and they need to get back to that bucket, we don't need to raise the level of difficulty by then taking away what vision they have by blinding them with a very powerful light source in a smoky environment. So I'm a big fan of any lighting on a bucket needs to be at waist or lower level. If not, and if you do it correctly, underneath the border step plate on the ladder tower bucket, you can put all the lighting you need below that. In the FRC does it, everybody does it, in the pre-angled downward slant of that light, whether it's 15 degrees or whatnot. And that way it gives you your illumination to where you can still see your landing surface, either on the ground or on the roof. It can still light up the side of a building as you're approaching, but it doesn't blind the personnel that are operating on the roof when they're trying to get back to the bucket. Straight sticks, we did a class in upstate New York a number of months ago, and they had a brand new device, rear mount, and it was a beautiful truck, works great. The problem was we found as they put their LED floodlights on arms on the tip of the aerial, that literally extended out maybe 6 inches on each side. Well, that's a foot total, right? Between left and right. And when we were doing some of the exercises, shooting the throat between multiple row frame dwellings. If you've got a person in a second or a third floor window, most firemen are going to say, I'll brake when I got to brake to get to them. And that's fine. But if that's the mindset, then the apparatus committee should have done their homework and never put it on there in the first place. And so you can still get those smaller cube style lights. Most people will automatically put them left and right of the tip of the aerial, which is great. My guys carry one facing forward or out angled downwards and then one straight down. So that way, in addition to the tennis ball, they know when they break the plane of the parapet wall at night, if they can't see the tennis ball, they know when that light, they can no longer see it, that the tip of the ladder is over the parapet. And then they keep another one slightly up and down. That way it lights up the landing area for when the crew is going over. But all in all, we need to narrow the profile on straight sticks. And if FRC or somebody could come up with something that would meet NFPA and be able to be attached to the rung on the tip, maybe not the tip or the last rung, but the second to back last rung, and actually nothing more than a C-style clamp that could then go on that rung and have it be an LED bar that's the width of the aerial fly section, but then have it angled downwards. You'd never break the plane left or right. And at the end of the day, you've already got tip power anyway, because most people, with the exception of very large cities, are already running electric monitors on pre-piped waterways. So that would be a huge win in terms of being able to achieve lighting where you need it, when you need it, but without increasing the profile to increase your tree trimming abilities.
So one of the points that I think you've made, but I'm going to stress it for the audience, is there is a thing is too much on the tip
Absolutely.
of that area.
Oh yeah. And ladder tower buckets, I've seen some at FDIC every year. I go around and I take pictures, and I'm amazed at what people will and won't put in a bucket. I'm a big fan of, it's more than just a bucket. It's what's the workflow to get to the bucket, right? And so, a lot of departments are moving to top access hatches, where if you carry all your saw equipment in, say, a left side compartment, when they get up there, that compartment also has a top hatch to where they can access it from the roof or on top of the rig. That way they can reach down into the compartment, grab their saw, get in the bucket with it. As an example, instead of having to carry it up the access ladder, down the aerial to get in the bucket. And so there's a lot of things that we can do, but yeah, you're 100% right. I've seen everything from people try and mount 4 sets of irons. Oh, maybe it was 3 mauls, everything you can imagine inside of a bucket. And you just reach the point where firemen, we want to be able to do everything, but it works against us, that mindset sometimes, because we overloaded. And then when you look at it, you only have a certain weight allowance by engineering in that device for, call it the live load factors, the things that aren't permanently attached. And at some point, These buckets by NFPA, I think the minimum square footage is 17 square feet, if I recall correctly, on square footage in the bucket. That can be taken up really quick when you start bolting and putting mounting brackets inside of a bucket. On the straight stick ladder, same thing. Everything from pike poles, irons, and everything in the world. And that's even more, I'm going to use the word dangerous, because we're just narrowing up the walking profile and the walking area that we have within the aerial to get to the tip and reach our objective. So I think that there's a balance that we have to find between usability, functionality, and common sense. And I think that some departments are dialed in on it beautifully. And then by and large, though, I think that the apparatus industry as a whole could do a lot better job of maybe offering advice and recommendations to customers that are seeking good, valuable input, instead of just saying, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there in terms of where we're going next, right? When it comes to designing the layout at the tip. And you talked about too much can be a big problem sometimes. So as far as you're concerned, your sort of advice or suggestions, what would you give when designing the tip or the layout at least?
Well, I'm going to make the assumption it's going to have a pre-piped waterway with a monitor, obviously an electric control monitor. Quite honestly, the lightest weight, minimal number of floodlights you need to achieve your objective. We have to remember it's not a light tower. It's intended to put firemen someplace and or remove victims from someplace. That's why it exists. And so we need to make it as user-friendly as possible. I personally do not have a problem with having nothing in the bucket, because I can guarantee you if there's one axe on that entire rig that is never checked or looked at, it's the one that's on the tip of the aerial. And realistically, how often does that get used? That's a workflow decision made by the individual department, but abandon whatever you don't need up there. NFPA says you have to have your speaker and your two-way hands-free communications. Okay, we got to have that. But I think that a lot of times you can move the controls for that device or your creeper controls based on the manufacturer and your options to where you can get them outside of your work zone, which is from rail to rail. Whatever you can get there as small as possible. And I'm not saying put it outside of the rails, but use the space for the actual what's the word I'm looking for? Trusting, if you will, of the rail. Put it there to take up that unused space to maximize your workspace between the rails, but not break the profile by going outside of the rails. Did that answer the question, or did I tap dance around it?
Or you're hitting what we're looking at. So one of the examples I'll give you with something we make at FRC for lighting. A lot of people want to use our new Radiant Eco light or our old Spectra lights, and they're a fairly wide head. Right. We've got a really nice 7-inch round. It's called our So Bright product. We see it at the base of an aerial all the time, but not as many people use it at the tip. And I think it's because they all get that big number in their head. Oh, I want that 15,000 lumen light at the tip. Well, the So Bright 7,000 lumens. And if I throw two of them together, one on each side, very small, very compact. I'm at that. Now I'm at 14,000. And the cool thing with the So Bright is I can do them in two different patterns. So I can do one flood and one spot if I want.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's those things that I think that as a fire service, I've seen it. I've been on apparatus committees. I was on the apparatus committee in the city of Houston for a number of years. And we get so entrenched. We become brand loyalists with regards to rig manufacturers. We become engine loyalists, transmission loyalists, lighting loyalists. I'm guilty, just like everybody is, because it's the known, it's the comfort zone, it's the support that we've gotten that we don't want to deal with the unknown. And I think that then we just try and apply what we've always applied in certain areas, but yet then we hide behind the fact that we have to continue to evolve. And you can't have it both ways. We either are going to continue to evolve or we're going to continue to keep doing what we've always done. And to your point, if you've got a functioning light that has a great lumen output, it just happens to be on the body or the chassis, nothing says it can't be relocated and added to the tip of the aerial to achieve the same goal times two. And it just makes perfect sense. But I think that we emphasize the wrong things when it comes to apparatus specifications. And I say that for the American Fire Service writ large. It's not any one department. But overall, we're always going to be, first and foremost, brand. That's driven by region. That's driven by who your service capabilities are in your region, but also who the big boy department in the region is. City of Houston has been the flagship department for, I can't think of how many manufacturers. FDNY, everybody in New York's always looking at what's FDNY doing. And I get that, but there's a service component of that's a benefit. But at the same time too, we don't worry about, let me qualify that. We will argue over what, color black we want the aerial to be, because that's the cool thing right now. But we won't worry about what we're doing for positive traction on the rungs on the aerial device. We'll just take whatever the factory says we get.
Well,
As
we
an
didn't.
example.
So just so that our audience knows, we prep a few questions at a time. We didn't prep this one, but you just led me into one that's controversial that I'll ask.
Sure.
What's your preferred color of the device and why?
Okay. I'm a big fan of aluminum aerials. I think that aluminum aerials, by and large, with the abuse that the fire service takes in, I always go to the worst case scenario, right? The weakest link, lowest common denominator.
Yep.
What is going to hold up the best with the least amount of maintenance? And when you get down to it, there's a number of manufacturers that make aluminum devices. And I think that aluminum is often discounted by loyal steel customers just because it's aluminum. But I think there's an application for it. And I worked off of either riding in the back or driving one for multiple versions of one, and great device. But that leads me to, on an aluminum ladder, leave it aluminum. There's no need to paint it because it actually works against you, because the aluminum with surface oxidation is an indicator for you.
Right.
So you painting an aluminum ladder to me doesn't make sense. A steel ladder, you almost have to paint to help maintain its corrosion resistance, if you will, unless you go with some galvanneal or zinc plated or zinc dipped aerial device that some manufacturers make. And so realistically, I think that when it comes down to it, it's department preference. We've got I take that back. We've got one white aerial and one black aerial because our department colors are black over red. Our new rig we have on order, the tandem axle, we went with black to match the fleet. And quite honestly, we've seen no negative impacts. I was leery of it at first, but the committee wanted to go that way. They had good reasoning for it, and I didn't have a reason not to. So we went with it, and we've had positive results so far. So I don't think the color matters. Some people will tell you that a white aerial at night is more visible, but when you look at it realistically, with our rung lighting that's now all but standard, with all of the side tracking lights that are on every aerial, with what we put on the tip, I think at the end of the day, I think our visibility issue has been removed. So I don't think color really matters.
And that's where I was headed with this is I've heard the argument of, you don't want to do a black device because if it's dark and it's up over the roof and the guys are coming off in a hurry, they're not going to see it. That's debunked these days with everything else we have going on.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, especially when you realize that the egress section on a straight stick aerial is always going to be a different color anyway. It's most of the time it's going to be orange or some high vis contrasting color. So to say that you're going to have a black tip of the aerial 6 feet over the roof line, that doesn't really work because it's going to be a contrasting color because it's a bolt-on removable egress by design.
Absolutely.
Yes. So let's circle back one more thing on the tip and weight, right? At Apparatus, when we designed the EXM2 monitor, weight was a major consideration. For example, the 1250 GPM remote control class, the Cobra EXM2, is anywhere from 13 to 21 pounds lighter than our competition. How much of an impact can that extra weight make to the end user design, or is it something that we just spend a little too much energy into?
No, I think it was a good investment on resources and research for one big reason, but it has to be done in the right order at the right time. Whatever monitor you're going to go with, because I know departments to do this or have done this, is whatever you're going to do, engineering needs to know up front when they're designing that device. There are certain weight allocations that are made for things that are bolted on, dead load, if you will, versus live load, whether it's a stick or a platform. So I think that realistically, if you're upfront with what monitor device you want, engineering factors that in, they give you a thumbs up, cool, keep going. That may or may not, depending on the weight of that device or whatever accoutrements you add, may then take away or in some way modify what your load will be later on, but they'll tell you that through the process. But no, I think it's a good investment because if you can always lighten something up, especially when you're sticking it 100 plus feet up in the air, it's always going to be better because it's less stress and strain. So no, I don't think it was a waste of time at all.
Right. All right. So let's talk a little bit about water flow on the aerial device. From both design, operations standpoint, we could start with the straight stick aerial. Any personal preference, pros and cons between a manual monitor and electric remote control?
On a straight stick, I think you almost have to have electric. In this day and time, I just think that a straight stick is more likely to be placed into service from the turntable, if not with some agencies or manufacturers from the pedestal. From the pump panel. And so I think that the electric, you will see them all the time. Organizationally, where I am, we always put somebody at the tip of the ladder. We're a big believer that point of use, visibility, and direction of the stream will give you better application than it will 100 feet below it. And so we've always believed in that. And so we've actually gone to other departments' fires, and our guys go up on their aerials because it's still going to have a more positive impact on putting the water where you need it. And so, no, I think that electric's on a straight stick because it's always going to be one most of the time, unless it's some oddball industrial application. And I think that electric gives you the option of getting it going quicker and still being able to control it if you're manpower limited. And that's a big thing on a lot of these rigs and specifications. Don't design your rig for 10 people when you're only running it with 3 or 4. And we spend a lot of money on stuff that we're never going to utilize.
100%. So when you spec that electric monitor, are there any special operating parameters you look for? Maybe like programmable oscillation, storefront blitz, for example. What goes into the sort of thought process behind that?
I think that if you buy a straight stick aerial, a storefront blitz capability needs to be a go-to. It needs to be a guarantee. Too many people think you have to have a ladder tower bucket or a tower ladder bucket to do that, and you don't. We drill it. The aerial devices we have, it has a storefront capability. So even when you're below 0, you still have X amount of range of motion in the vertical up. I think it's important. Pre-piped oscillation, I think that's going to be a customer specific, but it's a good thing if you have that capability. It's an option for the customer because if you have a lot of tank batteries, you have storage tanks, if you have other places where an oscillating feature may work or may be of benefit to lower your risk profile for your personnel by being able to set it and then maybe back away, I think it's a nice option to have, but that requires an electric monitor, which obviously on a straight stick, it's always 90% of the time going to be there. But I'm a big fan of, I think that a simple set of stack tips on a ladder pipe monitor is all you need. I fought that battle for years and years in the city of Houston. We had shift wars over it where we always carried a smooth bore and B shift came in and put on a fog nozzle or a match. And at 600 hours the next morning, we were swapping it back. And then I have my theories on smooth bore, but then stack tips too. How many times do you see complete sets of stack tips carried? Well, stack tips are like deck guns. Whatever is on there is what is going to be used. And so realistically, if you're going to go to ladder pipes, whether it be platform or stick, it's a GPM issue, right? So at that point, you want your greatest GPM capability as your default. Spin all the rest of them off, leave the 2-inch in the stream straightener on there, throw the other tips in the compartment. That way you're ready to go to war without the necessary steps with the correct configuration.
So as salespeople, we sell those stack tips and we always say to ourselves, they're never going to take these apart. I love your approach to it. Leave the biggest one on there, have the other ones there, because if there's a specific situation where I do want to reduce the flow or I want more penetration, so I want a tighter stream, I can do that. But they're never going to think, oh man, the proverbial crap's hitting the fan, I need to take that tip off and get more flow. They're just not going to do that.
Deck guns are the same way. Master stream devices, NFPA says they have to be a minimum of 1,000 GPO, but then we as a fire service say, well, let me raise the bar. I'm only going to make a 650 GPM capable device because I'm going to run a 1-inch tip on it. Well, unless you're trying to etch concrete, it's not necessary. And so realistically, spin it off and go to something that's favorable to your GPM, but then, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but then we run into especially with buckets and platforms, we then run into this, we want to run 1500 GPM monitors in a platform. Great. What's your waterway rated for? And realistically, if your waterway won't support it, why invest the money, the cost, and the repair cost, maintenance on 2 devices when you can only support one realistically? And then even if your waterway is designed for it, what's your water supply infrastructure in your community? Right. Where we are right now, we have one of the highest water supply grades in the state of Texas by ISO. We have the water, so we can do it all day long, but other communities aren't as fortunate. So there's no point in speccing components and capabilities that you will never realize.
So before, one last thing on straight sticks, before we shift over and completely talk about platforms, when you brought up the point about storefront blitz, and I think it's a great feature, it's a great capability. Something we need to point out to our audience, you must spec that. If you don't tell the manufacturer that you want to do that, their aerial device may not be able to do that. Not every single monitor on the market can do that. So you got to spec it in order to get it.
Now, some manufacturers' particular aerial devices or lines, that's almost a boilerplate capability now, but you're 100% right. Not all of them are. And then it has to have a complementary monitor or master stream device to be able to take advantage of that capability. And so, yeah, you're 100% on point.
So you started to move into the whole platform discussion.
Right.
You already gave a great point. Let's not put too much water flow capability up there that exceeds what our waterway can do.
Sure.
Let's assume that your waterway can do a lot of water. What would be your desired setup on a platform?
Honestly, I think that I still like the manual monitor. I still think that a single monitor is the way to go. And I'll explain my philosophy on the ladder pipe, as we already talked about, is that it's a GPM issue if you're going to ladder pipes, right? It's a GPM, a reach, a penetration, or a combination of those three things. So realistically, if you're having to skip to a ladder pipe, you probably need big GPM. But if you need two monitors, you probably need them from different vantage points on the same fire ground. So why have 2000 GPM coming from the same vantage point on, let's say, a large square footage fire or a deep seated fire, where you can potentially save the cost, save the maintenance factor, and go with single monitors. So that way you can still apply the 2000 GPM, but from different perspectives and opposite sides of the fire ground or in different positions, and be able to reach that fire or be able to apply that GPM. And so I'm a big fan of single monitor in ladder tower buckets for that reason.
Nothing wrong with that. We were looking for your opinion on it for sure.
And manual also. Yeah, I just believe that this always works. I mean, you can do this all day long, whether it's a wheel, whether it's a grab bar. And I just think that it's less prone to maintenance. It's less prone to break it at the wrong time, because let's face it, everything that's electric will always break at 3 a.m. when you need it the most. And so realistically, going with manual, whether it be MIVs on the side, manual MIVs instead of electrics, or even if you use keystones or whatever, go with manual as much as you can on everything, and know where your backups are.
Right. And so as we pivot here and get to some of the final questions, and we talked about technology earlier, right? Everything's constantly changing. There's always something new coming out, or like on the past episode, we talked about the new NFPA standards that are coming out specifically on the camera systems. Safely is focused in video. Our 6-camera 360 system is designed to get better coverage on an aero device. Operationally, this system is able to give you a preview vision on camera where the out triggers will be deployed. Is that considered a useful feature to you, or how do you view that when you go and
I'll tell you right now, our aerials have it, and it's been after we bought the first one with it, the second one and the third one have it, just because of the fact that, yeah, it is useful, especially when everybody's running understaffed. I mean, and that's just the American fire service right now. And so anything that you can do to give yourself a leg up and be able to, as you're sliding in, I can look at the objective, I can size up where I need to set up the apparatus as I'm shooting my approach, and then a glance at the screen, and I can see where that outrigger is going to be between two parked cars. I know whether I have to pull up a foot, back up a foot, or if I'm good where I am. So no, I think it's a great feature. And I think that when you do that, you have to have a backup capability also, because what happens is that we're all muscle memory trained, right? Is that if that camera breaks at 3 a.m, what else are we going to do? And so have a laser light, have something else that also is a backup. So if that camera ever goes down, you still got some visual indicator to let you know, hey, yeah, I'm good with my outrigger throw.
Top 3 suggestions for the end user to consider when specifying a new aerial device.
Or the 3 biggest they make. One,
either or that too. Yeah, we could do either or.
Can I do both?
It was both.
As far as things to keep in mind is basically spec what you need for your community. Don't worry about what your neighbor's running, first and foremost. Don't add features like we talked about that either the rig can't support or your infrastructure can't support. It's wasted money, both in the initial purchase plus the maintenance and the repair costs downstream over the life of the rig. And then everything's getting bigger. We've seen a slight reset in the aerial apparatus in our marketplace, where some manufacturers are going back to a smaller form factor because of the advent of the newer higher tensile strength steel and alloys that are available. And I think that realistically, aside from that exception, fire trucks are getting bigger. And we need to make sure that we're not getting bigger just to get bigger, and that if you need to get bigger, that it's done in a calculated way that works for the organization and your community, and keep things as simple as humanly possible and as small as possible. And those are the 3 things that I would caution or advise when sitting down and forming an apparatus committee.
Don't hide from the mistakes. What are the biggest mistakes?
too much electric stuff. Everybody wants to put everything in the world electric because it's the cool thing. It's easy until it breaks. And then to a point I made a moment ago, know where your manual backups are and make the manual backups accessible. I won't say what department. It just happened to be the third largest fire department in the country that I work for. And what we had a tendency to do was we bought 67, 68 identical pumpers from a large manufacturer. And this isn't their fault. It was a spec thing. The manual backup for the electric controls for the deck gun were literally in the middle of the pump house. So to access that, you would literally have to pop your panel, which is fine because it had quick flip latches. But and I'm 6'2". I have to reach all the way in completely. And then it wasn't situated at an angle. It was straight up and down. So make your manuals accessible and easily usable. That's what they're there for. And so that's a big mistake where people think about manuals. Oh yeah, well, we got to have it, but we'll just put it over there. The CAD drawing says it'll fit over there. Okay. Yeah. So we're fine. But a lot of departments don't even think about it. A lot of departments aren't even asked about it. It's where the manufacturer puts it because it fits in the pump box. And just one of those as an example, drain valves. I've seen more aerial waterway seals blow out because as part of their routine culture of aerial operations, they never popped the drain valve. Well, we didn't flow water. Well, valves leak by, right? And so we all know that water can't be compressed. And so realistically, at some point, your weakest link's going to give. And so my routine was always pop the drain valve, whether we flowed water or not. And then I went straight vertical. As I retracted, then I put in the cradle. That way, and you'd be surprised how much water came out on a quint out here, that you would be surprised because those valves leak by. And everybody wants a valve that they can open that then transfers the water through the discharge manifold to go to their ladder pipe. That's the valve that leaks by. What else? I'm trying to think of something else. I had a list written down and I tried to memorize it. It's just, we complicate things. And what we talked about earlier, if you're running with an average 4-man crew, don't spec it for 6. You're taking up extra space and you're taking away from the customization and the workflow benefits that you could use that space for the crew that you do run with. But we did it here. Our apparatus committee made a calculated decision to set up to only have 4 riding positions because that's the most that we ride. If we break and we're riding 5 on something, then we need to be putting another company in service because it's either for a hurricane that's coming or it's something here that's out of the ordinary. And so we need to stand up an additional company. So they rationalized and said, why do we need a 5th seat? Why do we need to take up this floor space? We'd rather do this. So that way they can have their tools at their point of use inside the rig. So that way they can grab them, step out and go. And so I think really putting time into the cab layout is something that I see a lot of departments not do.
Right. Larry, I wanted to give you some time here at the end to talk to the audience about your consulting business and sort of the overview, maybe some of the offerings that are coming up and any exciting things that maybe you want to talk about.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't prepared for that. No, it's a consulting company that I started a couple of years ago, just really to assist departments with some of the mistakes that I've personally been involved in or some that I've seen when it comes down to what we're investing or your community is investing in a very expensive ladder truck now that's $2 million easy. Pumpers are now $1 million. And so realistically, what we offer is the ability to go in, and we're in the process of assisting a department right now with what'll be their first area. And so we're trying to save them from the pitfalls. We're not there to dictate. We're there to answer questions and advise, make sure that the overarching goals of what their governing body said there was, which is to be cost effective, meet the needs of the community, and be maintenance conscious. And so that's what we do in that component. We do fleet needs assessments where we'll go in and assess a fleet from a maintenance, a repair, a safety perspective, an operational perspective. And then what we do the most of is aerial operations training. We just finished up a big class down in the Texas Valley about a month ago. We're going back down there in April. It seems right now, from what I got the other day, we've got some other things in the pipeline. So aerial apparatus, to me, operational, on the surface, it seems so simple, but what we're finding is that there's a lot of people that really want to understand how to do it. And we just happen, the people that work with us, we happen to have the benefit of experience having done it. And there's ways to achieve the goal. You just have to be willing to think outside of the box. And so that's what I think we bring to the table, is covering the basics, but showing how to apply the basics in a non-traditional setting. And so realistically, that's what we try to do. We're not out there to be cavalier or take risk. They aren't our rigs. But at the same time, too, we want to make sure that our clients are able to use them in the most beneficial way for their community and their people. And that's really what we do. And then we also have skill set stuff on the whole truck company classes that we do, like the one I mentioned down in the Valley. We did that for 5 cities at a Pools chapter. It was a great experience for us. And we covered VES, we cover forcible entry, we cover vertical ventilation on flat and pitched roofs. And then we do can searches. And then on top of the aerial apparatus positioning component, we turn that into a 3 or a 4 day class. And then the last day is nothing but scenarios where they are applying every one of the skill sets, plus the apparatus positioning stuff that we cover. And then each scenario we stop, we address, we critique. And then the next scenario, it gets better every time. And so if we can bring the norm or the default up by the time we leave, then we've done our job.
Oh, sure. And if someone's interested in all that, what's the best way to get involved?
The easiest way to reach out to me is, quite honestly, is through Instagram. It's C_side_consultants on Instagram, or Larry at seasideconsultants.com is my email. And we'd be happy to talk about any potential needs or where we could assist.
Sure. Okay, well, Jason, as per usual, end of the show here, I usually open up the floor for any final comments or thoughts before we get wrapped up.
This has been a great session. I think you've given our audience an awful lot to think about. Thank you for your time and your openness and your willingness to participate. And I think there's a lot we could talk about, and we'll probably look to have you on again in the future.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. Like I said, I can talk to anybody about fire trucks, especially aerials. And again, it's not I know more than anybody, because I learn just as much when I go to these different places. I learned from one manufacturer that it scared the hell out of me, but it's designed to do that. And I was like, okay, cool. But what happens when the computer doesn't say stop? But, so I consider myself still a student of the job and of the game. And the minute you stop learning, man, it's time to find something to do, or a beach somewhere. But no, I appreciate y'all having me on. I look forward to it. And if there's ever anything you need from me, you know how to get a hold of me, and I'd be more than happy to help out.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. We appreciate that. This wraps up another episode of Rig Recon Live. This is an episode we talked about aerial apparatus spec. So if you haven't already, make sure you follow us on social media at Rig Recon, and then go to rigrecon.com for the latest content, and you should catch up on all the latest episodes. Until then, spec the best.